with several prospects choosing to go back to college instead of staying in the NBA draft. We are now going to talk about the top 10 players available in the transfer portal. And for that, I have to welcome in the one, the only Isaac Trotter to help me break it all down. So, Isaac, welcome to the show, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a fun time, I think, in the portal, right? With the rosters are starting to materialize a little bit. And I think as the stay or go decision started to happen, we're starting to get a really good feel for how much fun next year in college basketball could just be with just so much talent that's coming back to play. It's led to some really, really loaded up rosters. And I feel like the money is obviously a big part of it too. College basketball is money, and these rosters are kind of showing it.
No doubt about it. Now, before we go any further, I've got to shout out the production team here because we had to change some graphics in the last hour because we've had some big commitments come through. Ugonna Onyenso, he's committed to Kansas State. He was at Kentucky last year. He put his name in the NBA draft, didn't get a ton of traction, but now he is headed to K-State, and obviously that is a big one. Another big man on the move, or should I say heading back, is Trevon Brazile, who's going back to Arkansas to play for John Calipari. So we've got two big men coming off the board in the last hour here. And Isaac, let's first talk about Ugonna. Like, what does this mean for Kansas State and Jerome Tang? Because I think Ugonna's got a chance to establish himself as not only one of the best rim protectors and lob threats, but I think he's got a little more offensive game than we saw last year at Kentucky as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, he's a guy that I think wants to show that part of his game. I think that's a big reason why he became a free agent again and hit the transfer portal. And I think he definitely wanted to stay in the NBA draft. But when he got that feedback that it wasn't going to work, going back to school and finding a place with a lob threat, a guy, if you're going to be a lob threat, you need someone to throw you lobs. And Doug McDaniel, the new Michigan transfer, is a really, really good lob thrower. He's an excellent, just so fast, can really break defenses down. You're always having to, you're kind of struggling. Do I play drop coverage against him because he can really shoot threes? You need somebody on that back line that he can throw stuff to, and Onyenso will certainly do this. But defensively, the reason Kansas State's excited about this one is because Onyenso arguably could be the best rim protector in the transfer portal outside of Cliff Amori, the Rutgers transfer who went to Alabama. He's just awesome around the rim. Kentucky's defense last year was atrocious at the rim, and they were 10% better guarding the rim when Onyenso was on the floor. So I expect him to waltz into a starting job at Kansas State. I don't know if he could have found, a guaranteed starting spot at some of the other destinations that were looking at him in the portal. Kansas State, I think he does have that right now. And you just think about him and Achor together, the transfer out of Sanford. That's a lot of athleticism. That's a lot of rim protection for a Kansas State defense that was excellent last year. We have high hopes for Jerome Tang as a defensive coach. I have a lot of respect for him on that end of the floor. And he's got the ability to have, a nasty 1-2 punch on that back line of that defense.
Is someone who's watched Ugonna since he first arrived in the U.S., came over, played with Team New England, then at Putnam Science Academy. I'm just excited for him because I didn't see the same joy in him this year. And that's not a criticism of John Calipari or anything like that. But for as good as he was defensively, I think he's going to be even better on that end of the floor when he's a little bit more involved offensively. We see that time and time again. Guys get a few more touches. They get a chance to show what they want to show offensively. And suddenly the defensive motor goes up even more. So I think he's got another level defensively. And as I said, the guy I saw in high school was a 7-footer who had just a little bit of shooting touch and could do some things facing the basket. So I'm excited to see if we see any of that progression as well. I want to turn the page here, and I want to ask you about Trevon Brazile. Now, coming into this season, he had that ACL. Now, flashback about 16, 18 months ago, and this guy was trending for the must bus. He was coming up with big finishes. He was showing shooting potential, athleticism, and size. The NBA scouts were getting excited. Unfortunately, he tore his ACL and was not ready for the beginning of practice for the 23-24 season. But now he's going to stay at Arkansas, going to play for his third coach in 3 years after beginning his career at Mizzou. I'm not really sure what to expect from Brazile, but I know that when things are clicking, he can be a really enticing prospect because of the overlap of that size, the shooting potential, and the explosive athleticism. What are your thoughts about what he might look like under John Calipari?
I'm excited for him. I think he made a really good decision to exit the NBA draft and come back to school. And then
Yeah.
when you just kind of look at some of the potential places he could have gone, the fact that he gets to play the 4 at Arkansas is awesome. I love the idea of pairing him with a Jonas Adu, who's terrific at being able to guard opposing centers. He can protect the rim, and you can kind of let Brazile maybe play a little bit more off the ball defensively, where he can just roam a little bit and be athletic and go get stuff off the glass and go pin shots at the rim as a help side, weak side shot blocker. So I like the idea of him there at the 4, and you need to surround him with a lot of drivers, guys who can create open shots for him, that can create those long closeouts that he can get after it. And Arkansas certainly has that with Nelly Davis, and they obviously have Boogie Fland, and they've added DJ Wagner. So John Calipari's added a lot of talent. A 4 was a big, piece that they really had missing, and Brazile certainly checks off that box. And now I think the ripple effects of what this means moving forward in the transfer portal for guys like Coleman Hawkins is really, really fascinating, because I'm not sure there's room for both at Arkansas. I guess we'll find out, though.
All right. Well, hold that thought. We're going to get there in a minute. But let's talk about now the best names left on the board, because this is a list that is shrinking rapidly. I mean, at the beginning of the week, you still hey, we got 5 or 6 impact players coming out of the NBA draft who college teams can really focus on. But with these 2 guys coming off the board, that list is less and less, and we expect some more movement here. Want to ask you about Jamir Watkins, the Florida State product. Got some good traction in the NBA process. I mean, he had some people who liked him, just the athleticism, the motor, the defensive potential, and versatility. What do we know about where his recruitment stands now, and what might he bring to a college program next season?
Yeah, I mean, he was a late exit from the NBA draft, like right at the last second. He exits the draft and comes back to school. And, there's kind of been some conflicting reports. Michigan has certainly been involved, and they're expected to get a visit. St. John's, our colleague at CBS, John Rothstein, reported that St. John's is also going to get a visit from him this week. There's been others that have reported that that's not going to happen. So we're still kind of up in the air on that. But I think he's one of the better wing handlers in the portal. He's hands down the best available player left in the portal. But I think he's, one of the best talents in the portal overall, just when you factor everything in. And if you just start to think ahead about what that could look like at Michigan, they have a hole at the 3. Trey Donaldson is a guy I really like out of Auburn. I think Ohio State transfer Roddy Gale is going to be a really good player for them. But there's a real hole at the 3, maybe a hole at the 4 too, if they're not going to play Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden together. We'll find out. And they could use a big, strong, physical wing handler like Jamir Watkins, who I think can really put a ton of pressure on the rim. And I wouldn't say he's a knockdown shooter right now, but his jumper has continued to improve at lower volume. And I think at Michigan, you could start to see, what do we know about new Michigan coach Dusty May? Is he just wants a lot of guys that can handle the basketball and play one-on-one basketball and just draw 2 defenders and then kick it, drive and kick and do it again. And you throw him in that mix with some of the guys that they've added so far, it's hard not to be bullish on what Michigan is. And we'll see what St. John's does, because if St. John's gets him involved, I would have some questions about the fit, but the talent is 100% there. You could see it defensively. Him, Kadari Richmond, Davon Smith, Aaron Scott, that's a fun little quartet of big, physical, athletic guys that can really get downhill.
I'll tell you what, you mentioned the shooting. If Jamir Watkins can make spot up standstill threes, he's going to be a pro for a long time, because that was the piece of feedback in this draft process. You've got to be able to make spot up open shots. If he can use this next year to really work on that part of his game, I think it's going to pay dividends, very figuratively and literally, in about a year. Although let's face it, he's probably making good money this year. All right, moving on now. I want to talk about Wooga Poplar leaving Miami. Another guy who was firmly on the NBA radar in the first half of the season and then just kind of tailed off. But when this guy gets it going, his best basketball is really, really impressive. I mean, you see some of these big highlights here. He's also a shot maker who can make shots in bunches. He's got positional size at the 2. That's an overlap that is rare and does translate up levels. So what do we think about Wooga at this point? Because quite frankly, Isaac, there are some highs and there are some lows with this guy too at this point.
Yeah, he exits Miami, and I talked with him in Chicago, and the big thing with him was that he's looking for a role where he's not playing on the wing, right? He had the 5th highest usage rate at Miami among their top 6 in that rotation. He wants to have the ball in his hands. He wants to be a guy that gets to make decisions in pick and rolls. He doesn't want to just be a spot up guy. He wants to have plays drawn up for him, which is why he's in the portal. And the two teams that have continued to make a lot of sense for him are Oregon and Villanova. And Oregon has had a really strong offseason. The fact that they've been able to keep guys like Jackson Shelstad and Mookie Cook and Kwame Evans out of that recruiting class is awesome. But they've gone in the portal. They've added a TJ Mbaba, who I'm a big fan of. But they could use another big type of wing. And I think that Poplar would be a really good fit there, especially as they try to figure out if N'Faly Dante is going to play or not for them next year. If he leaves, and that's going to open up even more of a usage rate for Wooga Poplar to come in. But the other team is Villanova. And I just, it feels hard for me that Villanova is not going to try to really make a big push for Wooga here, because just reading the tea leaves, what Villanova's offseason's been this year. They tried to get Max Shoga in, and he ends up going back to VCU. Like they're desperate. Like they're desperate for a big splash, and getting Eric Dixon is back is huge, but they need another big time score. And Wooga, for some of the flaws that is part of his game, like the talent is certainly there. Like you could talk yourself into him potentially being a top of the scouting report guy for a ton of teams in college basketball. And I think Villanova would definitely give him the role that he's looking for and the kind of the price tag that he's demanding.
Part of me wonders if Wooga, who's from Philly, is better off going away from home. You watched him last year in Miami, and like I said, there were some extreme highs and some extreme lows. This is about an everyday mentality for him. And sometimes, and I don't know this, I'm speculating, but sometimes the distractions of being at home can be counterproductive to that, because you've got to have a professional mindset where you're going to do your job every day. So it's going to be a very interesting decision for him that I think should and probably will come down to more than just NIL. All right, you mentioned this guy earlier, and obviously there are some implications based on the news from earlier today. That's Coleman Hawkins, the ever quotable Coleman Hawkins, who wants to be able to go to a school where he can watch football next year and has no intention of ever playing in the Big Ten again. Media training availability is limited, apparently, going into the combine. So, Isaac, I ask you now, like, do we still think Arkansas is the leader here? Or if they are not, what could the ramifications be for some potential other schools to make up ground here?
Yeah, I think we're still kind of in wait and see mode with how Arkansas feels about Coleman Hawkins and how Coleman Hawkins feels about Arkansas after Trevon Brazile kind of takes one of the spots. Now, what do we know about John Calipari? He will love to play two bigs at a time. And I think you could probably find 80 front court minutes and split those up between Adu and Hawkins and Trevon Brazile and be just fine, right? But does that mean Savannah Visic is annoyed? Does that mean Adu Thiero is a little bit annoyed if he doesn't get to play the four and has to play mostly the three? I guess we'll find out. But here's the thing we know about Coleman Hawkins. He is the best stretch four available in the portal. Like, you're not going to find someone like him. He's the best stretch four, period, right? We have 2,000 guys in the portal. There's not a stretch four that's better than Coleman Hawkins or more proven than what he's done. And that commands a big price tag, because that's arguably one of the most valuable positions in basketball, as the game changes and as you're trying to get the lane opened up and as you're trying to be versatile defensively and offensively. And Hawkins is a big part of that. So I think I'd keep an eye on Kansas State. Even after Ugonna and Onyenso, they still have room for a potential piece like that. Like, I think they'd have room in the budget for a potential piece like that as well. That would be a really, really big addition for them. The new team that we've heard a little bit today is SMU. And honestly, that sounds a little bit odd to me. It just wasn't a team that I was necessarily had near the top of my radar, but we know that they have a great history with bigs dating back to what Andy Enfield has done at USC, and Eric Mobley is on that staff as well, and he's highly regarded as a big man guy. And you look at some of the pieces that they've added in the portal. Yes, they've added a lot of bigs, but Matt Cross is a good player. He's not Coleman Hawkins. So you could add a potential piece like that. I think you'd probably have to do that if you're an SMU who has a lot of finances and is heading into the ACC. So I think we're still kind of in wait and see mode with Hawkins, because it could change by the day with a guy like this, especially now after some of these decisions. Like, would I be stunned if North Carolina wanted to come back in and try to get back involved in something like this? Would I be stunned if Arkansas, makes a run and says, hey, we could still use you? Like, no, that's the type of caliber of player he is. And I think when you add a player like that, like, you're going to win a lot of games, because he just impacts winning on a lot of different ways.
I feel like Arkansas is almost playing like fantasy basketball right now, and they just have the biggest budget, and so it seems, and they are getting immediate impact guys. But my question with this roster, and this is a conversation we had time and time again at Kentucky over the years, is how do these guys fit together? Because fantasy basketball is very different than when five guys get on the floor together and they got to learn how to share the ball. And for the life of me, I don't know who the connector is in this group. I don't know who the ball mover is in this group. I know there are a lot of dudes who can score the ball when it's in their hands, but who's going to move it from one to the other is the part that I'm just not sure of. You mentioned the potential for Kansas State to add a four-man or another front court piece alongside Ugonna and Onyenso, who they received a commitment from about an hour ago. Reason being is that Arthur Kaluma is in the portal and potentially looking for a new home. This was his first year at Kansas State after previously attending Creighton, where he was part of a very good team there, and now he's on the move again. What do we make of Kaluma at this point, and what might some of his possible destinations look like?
Yeah, it's been very, very quiet with Arthur Kaluma. I talked with Baba Miller at the NBA Combine, and at that point, he was uncommitted, and he was basically saying, like, Kansas State is recruiting me really hard, and Arthur Kaluma was basically a part of that. And that was after Kaluma had entered the portal. So I think Kaluma and K-State, he aren't necessarily on like negative ground there. I don't think they're on bad ground after he entered the portal. So I think if you're looking at K-State's roster, like bringing Kaluma back would make a ton of sense. If you want to ride with Kaluma at the 3, Achor at the 4, Ugonna Onyenso at the 5, like that has a chance to be a hellacious defense. Like I really, really like that defense together. And the thing with Kaluma, I feel like sometimes you're always just not really sure what version of him you're getting. Like when he's assertive and he's making quick decisions with the basketball, like he can be a really impactful player. And we've seen him be able to guard multiple positions and have an impact on that end of the floor. But when he like settles and jabs and stuff like that, like it can be a little bit clunky offensively. So, and the turnovers have certainly been a real thing too. So at this point in the portal, Kaluma is valuable because he's arguably one of the most proven scorers that's available. So there's going to be a big market for him, but the teams, like there's been no noise with him. I think that's going to change this week though.
Yeah, I think there's questions. I think there's questions about like, hey, are you a stats guy or are you a guy who's about winning, even if it means you're the third offensive option? And I think that's some of the concerns that originated at Creighton. I think the fact that it didn't go necessarily quite as well as he hoped this year at K-State, I think only added to that noise. And I suspect that's maybe why we haven't heard quite as much to this point. But to your point, you get here and there's just not better options left. So going to be very interesting to see what happens with Arthur Kaluma. All right, everybody, you can find more from this on 247sports.com. We've got wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, transfer portal updates, and much, much more.